Welcome to Keeping Score. I'm Rick Horrow. Each week we bring you insights from the playmakers, deal makers, and rule makers in the world of sports. I'll give you my take on some of the items of the week using my 30 years of experience doing deals for teams, leagues, and players in the $750 billion business of sports. Plus, we'll talk with a central figure in the sports world. The views expressed in this podcast are my own and do not represent the views of Reuters. Let's get started. This is always the time of the year that I love best. I don't know if my buddy Dan Colarusso does, but this is the time that all the sports intersect. We got the golf playoffs over. We've got the NASCAR playoffs heating up. Major League Baseball playoffs just starting. Football at the quarter pole. College football as well. Basketball, baseball. You want it, you've got it. But we've also got some business issues, and that's where Dan Colarusso, the worldwide global editor of Reuters, comes in. How are you?
I'm doing well, Rick, but I think you're talking about how great the sports scene is right now is rubbing some salt in my wounds. That my baseball team's not in the playoffs. My football team's 0-4. When your last hope as a sports fan is the Brooklyn Nets, things are tough. So I'm going to live vicariously through you and the Cubs and the Dodgers and hope that kind of keeps me going for the next few months.
Yeah, I understand. Well, but hey, by the way, what we don't have is a clear path to college basketball being clean as it might have been earlier. We have some huge indictments and huge investigations. What's your take on all that?
I can't say I'm shocked by it, but I can say that I'm surprised that somebody finally drilled down, that some government lawyer finally drilled down to do it. I mean, we all knew about the shoe companies and kind of the whispers were always out there, and the influence and the soft money that gets thrown around the industry was kind of common knowledge. But much like FIFA, FIFA was far more nefarious maybe, but the same way the Eastern District of New York, the federal prosecutors took down FIFA, this is I think it's a really tough shot for the NCAA. I mean, where do they go? Let's talk about marketing for a minute. And the NCAA as a marketing machine and March Madness and all the stuff that goes with that. How do you, if you were running the NCAA right now, if you were in charge, how do you market in the face of this, both to young players who, get criticized for being one and done, but that doesn't seem so bad right now in a system that feels so corrupt. How do you market? How do you keep the value of this asset up?
Well, and the harder question, it's difficult, but the harder question is where do you think the investigation leads to in next year? Because it's hard enough marketing when you have 4 assistant coaches from Southern Cal, Arizona, Ohio, Oklahoma State, Auburn, but then Louisville, Miami, and others may be indirectly implicated, South Carolina as well. But then these are assistant coaches. Does it reach as high as Pitino? Where does it go? Do you indict assistants to try to get the big guys?
Or do you go at the sneaker company executives? I mean, was it part of a marketing
obviously,
plan?
Let's not forget, that's where a lot of this started, with the dollars thrown around by the sneaker companies, and then the issues of who pays whom to get kids to recruit, and where do the kids ultimately go. So let's assume that the indictments that have happened are the only ones right now. You've got schools who have raised, in the Auburn case, their revenues about $13 million. They've generated a lot of money in the university's NCAA tournaments. Look at South Carolina, Arizona, USC, Louisville, Oklahoma State, Miami. We're not saying they're indicted, nor we're saying they're directly implicated, but those have been mentioned. When you add the money up in 2017 to the tournament, it gives you more than $30 million. So marketing becomes really tough, and putting together an athletic budget, given all of the uncertainty, becomes even tougher.
Right, and as players look to derive value from their personal brands, do great young high school players want to start off with a taint, of being in with one of these programs. So there's a real cycle here that goes, and these are not small schools, these are not insignificant schools. This is a really interesting cycle that we're going to take it into, and it'll be, the NCAA has been, under scrutiny socially, financially, legally for many, many years now, and it will be interesting to see what iteration it comes out here. If it goes into crisis mode, does damage control like any corporation and comes out of it, or if it takes it as an opportunity to say, let's figure out a different economic model, because this thing where, kids are stealing video games and coaches are multimillionaires, it isn't working for us.
Well, and one more comment before we go on, because we're going to be visiting this a lot, to be sure. The core allegation is that agent or runner X funneled X amount to a player to get him to commit to school X, then sign with the sneaker company, and then the agency once he turned pro for representation. You fill in those blanks, you have a heck of a lot of schools you're dealing with.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And every school with a high profile name, every school that's going to go, one game deep into the tournament is going to have that logo on them, and that's the payoff, right?
Yep, and it rocks maybe the industry to the core, and that's an interesting segue, because let's define what the core means. PricewaterhouseCoopers comes out with an annual survey that reflects the growth of the sports industry, broadly defined. The growth rates over the next year, according to the study, will be down from 8% last year to 6.5% this year, and cynics are saying, well, that's a 20% decrease. And then realists are saying, yeah, but still, I'd take a 6.5% growth rate anywhere. But then realize when you drill down on this, they talk about Olympics and the ads and the difficulty there, and they talk about how the kids are watching other stuff, like eSports. And so we'll get into that in a few minutes. But what's your take on that whole study?
Yeah, 6.4% would be good growth even for the Chinese economy these days, right? So, 6.4 is not a number to be trifled with. But I think you and I have touched on this since this show started. There is a changing nature of consumption and value and the formula that goes behind it. And as sports lose the young audience, which has turned away so many other industries and disrupted so many other industries, the onset of eSports has changed this equation. Now, that's a thing. Or is there a generation that's going to grow up that would rather watch people play video games than watch figure skating at the Winter Olympics? That's a dramatic shift on a level of corporate marketing dollars, of TV rights, of almost anything. Olympic boxing, which you remember was a huge sport when I was young, probably when you were young. Did they have gloves then?
No, we did it. We did it with the old leather helmets, and you put the calligraphy on the trees.
Right, bare knuckled. Yeah. No.
Right.
But,
yeah, exactly.
but it is a thing. Like that whole that is gone. That's not coming back. So I think the sports industry, I think in the study, the Olympics seems to be showing signs of slipping, and winter sports specifically. And I can say we've seen that in traffic and things around the Reuters assets. But why don't you address that? Like, how is Korea shaping up? I mean, this doesn't bode well. The next Winter Olympics is at the border of the hottest zone in geopolitics right now.
20 miles from the demilitarized zone, and the number is that Reuters delivered this bit of nugget news that South Korean Banks Federation pledged to buy nearly $1 million worth of tickets as part of their, quote, social responsibility efforts. The first phase of ticket sales, not surprisingly, was utterly underwhelming. That's their number, a 1.0 million total target for tickets. 60% coming from overseas customers, woefully under that. And if you're in a war zone or a maybe war zone, it's difficult anyway. And so the answer is, when you look at the reasons behind the assumptions of reduced growth, the growth is great, but you got to understand what about the future. And one of the big future issues is Olympics. Where is it going? What's happening? I think LA and Paris down the road, two major cities and major time zones, will change all that. But let's remember, you go into Korea, then you go to Japan, which again is that time zone, and then you come back to Beijing, to China again for the Winter Olympics. So it doesn't get any brighter. And as far as esports, we'll cover that in a couple of minutes. But before we go there, baseball's starting, the playoffs are starting. How about your Mets? Let's leave that alone. There are many teams in the playoff. They are not one.
No,
but
they're not.
It is interesting. Where are you going? What's our prediction, and what's your big issue in baseball these days?
My big issue in baseball these days is the proliferation of strikeouts. It's not a new issue, but it is an irksome trend to see the unproductive outs. That's my one thing. The length of the games, I think the games have become more manageable. I think there are some great rivalries. We're back with the Indians. We have the Yankees in. We have the Dodgers. We have the Cubs. There's a nice group of good market teams in there. So this playoff season should kind of, represent kind of the kind of buzz we saw last year too, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a really, really exciting time where anybody can win, and this is the beauty of the playoffs and that one and done. People didn't like it before, but it sure kept a lot of teams in the race. I think it's a brilliant move. One other tech issue, by the way, VR, virtual reality, continues to grow as a form of entertainment for consumers in baseball. Comerica Park, where the Tigers are not in the playoffs, but they're perfecting a way to generate some fan excitement, hitting against major league pitching, examples of interactive experience. And VR, they say, is going to be a very useful training tool to give players a better feel for different angles, ballparks, arm angles. It'll be fascinating to see how VR affects the entire sport of baseball in the next few years. So can you foresee a day where you watch your Mets on VR and hope and wish very fervently that they're actually in the playoffs this year? What do you think?
Well, I think, aside from the fact that I think they were about 3 people away from calling me to start a game this year, that the VR thing is really interesting. It plays into the whole stat craze. Like when you could be in VR and you can do arm angles of pitching releases, batting stances, and you can chart things and bring up data in augmented reality. Let's say you're watching the game and you could point your app at your screen or at a field and bring up a whole enriched screen of data around a player. That's fantastic. You don't have to wait for the announcer to say it. You don't have to wait for the scoreboard to do it. There's a great database, and you could know how many times, Ahmed Rosario has, gotten a hit with runners in scoring position. There's a whole richness to the live experience that I think teams need to push technologically. You've talked about it in basketball and hockey, but I think baseball has always been the nostalgic live experience, but I think the game has become the stat head game as well. And from there, that live experience has to stay premium because those TV contracts are going to get a little thin. I think that's where you're going to see some growth and some interesting projects.
I think it's obvious the whole tech area in all sports is another way to attract millennials to every sport, stick and ball included. And so we promised we'd get back to eSports and cover it for us as a major sport. Took a while, but we wanted to get one of the best people in the business to do it. It is ironic that they're talking about, by the way, adding eSports as soon as Paris 2024 to the Olympics. The IOC making decisions in 2020, events finalized in 2021. You talk about boxing. Thomas Bach says he's he's predisposed to look at this as long as they don't use the violent games. And then the critics are saying, well, what about boxing in the Olympics? That was violent. But the fact that they're even talking about it makes us feel good about the possibility of it happening. Christina Alejandre joined Turner Sports in March 2016 as the general manager of the E-League. She's the commissioner of that league after serving 15 years in video games and new media world. I didn't think it even was in existence for 15 years. Product development for Nickelodeon and Viacom and others. Octopi, Tribune, Warner Brothers. She is it in esports. And if you want to know a little bit more about that business and that sport, Christina Alejandre.
Rick Horrow, Sloan MIT Analytics Conference, and it gets bigger every year. And it's noisy during lunch because there are hundreds of thousands of aspiring students that want her job. That's exactly what it is. These are demographics that I have no idea about, but we're going to even delve into something even more significant. It's $1 trillion business, and I know mainstream sports, but I'll be the first to admit, Christina Alejandra, I have no knowledge of esports. So these next 15 minutes are a wild ride. Thank you. Thank you for.
Well, hold on. Here we go.
Hold on. Here we go. First of all, you are uniquely qualified. By the way, she is the general manager of E-League and vice president of E-League of eSports
for Turner Sports.
Sports.
Yes.
So obviously the connection between television and the E-League not only is important, it is joined at the hip,
yes,
correct?
It is joined at the hip. It's part of the Turner Sports DNA. E-League was formed in a joint venture with our partners WME IMG, but on the production side, Turner Sports is driving that.
So here's the thing that qualifies, obviously, Christina as an expert in the field. Led business development for 38 studios in Octopi. Any company that's named Octopi, you know it's a young demographic company. Licensing and product development for Nickelodeon and Viacom.
Yeah.
So you take all of the knowledge of graphics, entertainment, kids, and you put it to use in a really unique sport. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I definitely have. I'm a little bit of a unicorn in the esports space in that I have spent my entire career in the video game industry. So whether it is on the licensing side and product development side, whether it's on the business development side, publishing, and then esports, I have combined the two into this amazing job and opportunity. And I'm very well aware that the college students here are definitely gunning for my job, and it's a fun job to have.
Yeah, but you're entrenched and they're not, so there. So unicorn in a unicorn space, which is quite an interesting dynamic here when we think about it. Talk quickly about, dispel the argument the cynics use that this is not sports.
Look, you have people competing at a very, very high level, and while it is not a traditional stick and ball sports, like, make no mistake, like, these players and people have been basically dedicating their lives to compete. They practice, 40 hours a week, and it is deliberate practice. It's not just them playing video games. They're watching replays of other teams and what they're doing. They're developing new strategies. They're in-game leaders, much like there are in stick and ball sports. They have coaches, and they are competing at a very, very high level. I would look at the phenomenon of esports. David Levy, he's the president of Turner.
Sure.
Little known guy.
Yeah, little known.
But he was telling me the story about his son, Jake, was in his room and he was watching video games on his computer. He was watching people play video games.
How old?
And Jake was probably around the time, he's probably like 16 or 17 at the time.
Okay.
And so he was like, why are you watching that? Why are you, and Jake explained it really, really well. And I used this example. He said, Dad, you're a big hockey fan, right? And David said, yeah. And he goes, okay, so do you go to the games? Yeah. Do you watch it on TV? Yeah. Why do you do it? Well, I really like hockey, and I like seeing people compete at this elite level and seeing their technique and what they do. And Jake said, that's exactly why I watch esports. Yeah. And I think, for people to kind of translate that was a really great way of explaining it.
So all the business plans and all of the other analysis is fine, but the Turner family got sold into the deal right then, basically.
I mean, the Turner family got sold into the deal. TBS was going through a whole rebranding exercise, really trying to hit that 18 to 34-year-old demographic. And, esports was something that really resonated within that demo. So it seemed like the perfect fit, and we just needed to kind of find the right partner around that, and we have entered into a really great partnership with WME IMG, and that's how we were born.
So now we have situations where entities are actually creating esports stadiums. We have one in Vegas now and other places. Did we ever know when David Levy got the epiphany from his son in that room that it would ever get this big?
I don't know. When I took the job, they had already made up their minds that they were doing E-League, and I was definitely cautiously optimistic. I was a little bit worried that, that I would come in and they would kind of treat it as this little side project or fun project that Turner Sports were doing. And what we found was, or what I found was that Turner Sports treated it like any other sport under their verticals. We have the NBA, we have NCAA, and they treated E-League with the same care and respect that they do any of the other sports franchises that we work on. We had Emmy Award-winning producers, Emmy Award-winning directors. We have on the WME IMG side even, we have the president of business affairs intimately involved in what we're doing day to day. And so it was really treated like any other sport, and I think that you can see that. So when they made the decision to go into esports, they definitely went all in.
Where's the competitive side going? More teams, more leagues, more cities being represented? What's it look like in 5 years?
I think that we will see a little bit more regulation in the space as it relates to teams and players. Right now, it's a very volatile market. You see a lot of teams switching randomly. They even have a phrase for it. They call it roster apocalypse.
Wow.
So right now
Stick and ball sports have roster apocalypse, but for different reasons.
But for different reasons. But this is, you'll see after a major event, you'll see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 teams like swapping rosters completely or dropping people, and there's no real kind of rhyme or reason, because sometimes it will happen mid kind of season or mid competition, and so we'll see a little bit more, not regulation, but uniformity, I think, in the space, and as it grows and becomes a little less nascent.
Sponsorship, obviously, it's a no-brainer to say it appeals to the young demographic, but major sponsors feel like this is something they should ride in the future?
Yeah, absolutely, and we at eLeague have had a lot of success with bringing in a lot of non-endemic sponsors to the space, having sponsors like Arby's come in and really creating content that appeals directly to that eSports kind of core community, and this is a very engaged community, and what you'll find is for non-endemic sponsor, if you embrace that competitive community, they'll embrace you right back, and we've seen a lot of success with those partners.
So, long-term economics, obviously the television component and the sponsors came together at the same time, but how do you ensure the success of the league? Long-term commitment on the TV side, but what other parts do you need to make sure get buttoned up in the future?
For us, we're not just TV. We are primarily one of Turner Sports' first digital native sports, and so we know that people are going to watch on their own terms, whether they're going to watch sitting at their computer or sit at their couch and watching on TBS. So, for us, it's really important to be as platform agnostic as possible as it grows, and give the same viewing experience that somebody would find on digital as they would on linear, finding clever ways to integrate sponsorships and partnerships, and that's how we're really working to ensure the long-term success, because as technology evolves, as the way people watch evolve, we want to basically be on the forefront of that.
So as media gets turned on its face and people don't care about television sets anymore, and live television seems to be the real key reality show, this is one of the first leagues that's been created during this whole transformative period. What's so special about the timing that made this easier to create?
I think it is, eSports was kind of hitting this apex that, and people were becoming more familiar with the term eSports. Even though you yourself admitted don't know a lot about eSports, you've at least heard the word eSports, right? And I think that TBS really came in at a really great time, because they're really able to broaden that awareness and provide people a comfortable way to kind of absorb eSports and know about eSports. And eLeague, I think, has done a phenomenal job with the content that they're creating to make eSports more accessible to a mainstream audience.
We'll come back to the business in a minute, but what is the trait that makes a really good all-star eSport player? does he have to be nimble? Is it carpal tunnel-less? Is it up there? What's the deal?
I think it's both. There's definitely, in any sport, there's definitely an instinct that players have. And then there's also just there is a little bit of physicality in your hand-eye coordination and reflexes. There's a way to be able to break down and analyze the game. So it's a little bit of here, it's a little bit with the hand-eye coordination. And then also it's kind of a drive to constantly, as it is with any sport, to constantly practice and constantly get better and constantly find ways to improve.
So what are the biggest challenges that you now face in the next couple of years?
I think that one of the biggest challenges, which isn't something that we can't overcome because we're learning to do it, is you're seeing, especially in a native digital space, you're seeing ad blockers come in, and it's harder to monetize this community that's coming in, because generally, even in television or in digital, you're seeing people come in that run pre-rolls and mid-rolls, and that's how they make their money, by running these commercials. But with ad blockers, people don't see those, so you have to find ways to integrate different brands and content in order to help monetize that audience.
So I'll take one of those challenges and then take it to the next step, which is common to the digital transformation age. Do we have confidence that Madison Avenue is going to be smart enough to get out ahead and figure out how to monetize and recommend to their clients that they should monetize it?
I mean, you're already seeing it. You're seeing a bunch of VCs entering the space. You're seeing a bunch of high-level sports brands entering the space. I think right now we're at the point where people kind of need to get over a little bit of the FOMO that they're having because they're hearing about esports, so they're just throwing money in and investing. And I think they need to kind of take a step back and they need to look at what strategically makes sense for their company, why they should invest, and then also finding the right people to leverage whatever asset they're investing in or buying.
And obviously, this is an area that is so evolving. Does it ever, do you think there's ever a time where the stick and ball sports, baseball, for example, just announced a deal with Game of Thrones, and I guess one of the issues is, do we have a time where the mainstream stick and ball sports, A, respect you, and B, look at you as a partner?
I think they already do. You're seeing huge investment by the NBA into esports, right? NBA just announced their league that they're doing for esports. You have NBA teams that are investing into esports organizations. You have football teams, meaning our soccer. You have soccer teams abroad investing into esports. So I think you're really starting to see that happening right now.
Finally, Boston Area Conference, International Conference, Boston Area Conference, Boston television distribution as well. So what do we tell the esports fans in New England?
It's wicked good, and they should definitely pay attention to esports.
So, Christine Alejandra, this is an incredible world. We're going to stay in touch, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Keeping Score. The producer, Alex Cohn. Associate producers, Freddie Joyner and Ryan Warner. Assistance provided by Carla Swadek, Tanner Simpkins, and Ronnie Sokach, and the executive editor of Reuters Digital, Dan Colarusso. I'm Rick Horrow. Thanks again for listening. See you next time on Keeping Score.